The chair recognizes himself for an opening statement. The Congressional Review Act requires agencies to submit a rule to Congress before the rule can take effect. After submission of a rule by the agency, Congress has 60 days to introduce and pass a resolution of disapproval under expedited procedures. Today we are considering H.J. Res. 44, which provides for congressional disapproval of the rule submitted by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives relating to factoring criteria for firearms with attached stabilizing braces. On January 31st, 2023, the ATF issued a final rule titled Factoring Criteria for Firearms with Attached Stabilized Braces that effectively bans pistol stabilizing braces nationwide. That rule redefined a firearm with an attached stabilizing brace as a short-barreled rifle subject to the regulation under the Gun Control Act of 1968 and the National Firearms Act of 1934. The rule directly contradicts the prior 2012 determination made during the Obama administration on which law-abiding firearm owners relied on for a decade, that a firearm equipped with a stabilizing brace would not be subject to the National Firearms Act's controls. The rule will require the owners of roughly 40 million firearms with stabilizing braces in circulation to obtain a special registration, surrender, or destroy their brace by the compliance date or face criminal penalties as a result of this regulatory change. It actually make them a felon if they don't do that. This isn't a law that Congress passed or a ruling from a judge. Rather, it is a decision from an unnamed and unaccountable bureaucrat to turn law-abiding Americans into felons with the stroke of a pen. As the duly elected representatives of our constituents, we cannot sit idly by and allow executive branch bureaucrats to make law that impacts millions of Americans. This rule usurps the legislative power of this body. I urge my colleagues to support the resolution and recognize the ranking member now for his opening statement. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized, Mr. Massey.
The most disingenuous or uninformed thing that will be said tonight about this issue is that banning a 4-ounce piece of plastic is going to save lives. It will not save a single life. So let's not say that. You're not even, this doesn't ban a gun, this ATF rule. It bans a piece of plastic that goes on a gun. It looks similar to something that won't be banned, which is a collapsible stock. There will be 100 million collapsible stocks still legally obtainable in this country. But this isn't a collapsible stock. It just happens to look like one. It was designed for pistols, for people who have disabilities so that they can stabilize a pistol and shoot it from their wrist. And let's be clear, the other side of the aisle had 2 years when they controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House. They could have made a law against this particular plastic accessory, but they chose not to. Instead, this is a ruling from the ATF, a ruling that in just a few weeks is going to create tens of millions of felons who have no idea that they're going to be felons. And there will be prosecutions. And these people followed the law when they purchased these items. The law that they could go look up and read, a law that the ATF interpreted for them, sent letters to the manufacturers and the purchasers of these things, and said that these plastic accessories are legal. Under our technical interpretation of what this plastic accessory does, it is legal to buy, it is legal to sell, it is legal to transfer. In fact, nobody even needed a license. It's a plastic accessory. This thing can't shoot a bullet. It doesn't function like a gun. It is a plastic accessory.
Is it a bump stock?
I'm glad you asked this question, Mr. Gates. It is not a bump stock. It does not simulate or accelerate rapid fire of a firearm. In fact, it makes a pistol less concealable. A pistol regularly wouldn't have this thing on it. It is something you add to a pistol that makes it less concealable. And under the law, it is legal because it was designed not with the intent to allow a pistol to be fired from the shoulder, but with the intent to allow somebody who's weak and can't fire a pistol from the wrist to be able to more accurately fire a pistol from the wrist. So it doesn't even meet the definition, the legal definition of what would be a stock added to a pistol. It is a pistol brace for the wrist. And let's be clear, people had 120 days to comply with this. This isn't even in the news. A lot of people bought these. They're in their safes. They're in their houses. They have no idea that on May 1st, if we don't do something, on May 1st, there will be tens of millions of felons who have no idea that they've just become felons. But the ATF did something like this in 1994. They reclassified what was called the Striker 12 shotgun, street sweeper. They changed it to a destructive device. There were only a few thousand of these guns. They gave people 7 years to register these guns. Those were guns, by the way, not plastic accessories. And they gave them 7 years to do this. By the way, the bump stock ban, there were probably 500,000 of those in existence. Something similar happened with those. How many of those do you think have been registered? About 500. About 500. Because a lot of people don't even know that they are felons in possession of that at this point. Because of a rule, not because of a law, because of a rule. Yes, the ATF accepted comment, but they really didn't do much about the comment or the concerns. And what this boils down to is, what was your intent when you purchased this plastic accessory? They're trying to impart crime based on intent, and that's what this rule does. This rule is flawed. This rule will create millions of felons. We need to stop this rule. Mr. Clyde's Congressional Review Act needs to be implemented quickly to prevent creating tens of millions of felons on June 1st. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
You know, I know that we've been here a long time, but this is an important issue, and any time that long-standing decisions are reversed for political purposes, we do have a reason to act, and that's why we're acting. I'd yield to the gentleman from Kentucky.
I thank the gentleman from California. Let me repeat this. When I said it at first, I didn't know how often it would be repeated by the other side of the aisle, but the most disingenuous or uninformed thing that will be said tonight in this debate is that banning a 4-ounce piece of plastic is going to save lives. And it's been said that, well, you can just register this piece of plastic with the existing firearm as a short barrel rifle. Well, do you think registration is going to stop these crimes? All of the crimes that have been mentioned tonight were committed by people who could legally register these things anyway. The registration, they passed background checks. The registration is not going to save lives. But what it will do, because millions of people don't know that by June 1st, they have to be registered, it will create felons. Don't tell me on the other side of the aisle there won't be at least 10 million felons who could be convicted on June 1st, because there will be. And by the way, it said, oh, just register it as a short-barreled rifle. Guess what? 26% of Americans live in a state where you can't own a short-barrel rifle. So the ATF has proposed a solution for 26% of Americans that's actually illegal in their own state by reclassifying a firearm with this 4-ounce piece of plastic on it as something that has to be registered as if it was a machine gun, as if it were a silencer. You can't even fire a bullet. You're not going to, the ATF rule will not save a single life. And let me talk about something else. Regulatory agencies, I know the Supreme Court has given a lot of deference to regulatory agencies to implement regulations, to interpret laws. We are not talking about regulations that will impose civil penalties on corporations for exceeding parts per million sulfur dioxide in their emissions. Okay, these are not civil infractions that they have created. These are felons that have been created through regulation, by an agency who for years, a decade, has said this is legal. So they've flip-flopped on this. This is actually the second time they've flip-flopped on it, but they're flip-flopping on it now, and they are in the process with this rulemaking authority that they claim to have, going to create millions of felons. And I know my colleague, Mr. Ivey, earlier in our debate was concerned in the context of immigration that people could become criminals, but they wouldn't have the intent or the knowledge. That's what's going to happen in this situation, is people are going to become criminals on June 1st, because May 31st is the deadline, without the intent or the knowledge that they are committing a felony that the ATF created by interpreting a rule. And this isn't some small felony. It's like 10 or 20 years and over $100,000 fine for not registering this piece of plastic on a firearm as a National Firearms Act weapon. People do not have any idea. Millions of people have no idea this is going to happen. And again, let me just say this one more time, because I don't think it's disingenuous from the other side of the aisle, and I don't want to impugn their motives. I think it's just highly uninformed to think that they will save lives, because these things now require a piece of paper and a $200 tax with the federal government, that will save lives. It's not going to save a single life. And I'm sorry that myth is being perpetuated here. And I yield back to Mr. Issa from California.
And I thank the gentleman for his eloquent explanation of why, as you called it, flip-flopping is so inappropriate. We give deference to agencies once we've written law, but we cannot allow the political activity of simply deciding under one administration to do one thing and on the other to do the opposite. And for that reason, we must act. And I thank the gentleman, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
I agree with our Democrat colleagues that we have to focus on the victims of crime. And boy, did we get an earful from some of them in Manhattan earlier this week. And what I heard from victims from crime is that they observe the soft on crime policies pushed by Democrats as far more dangerous than law-abiding gun owners who work to keep our communities safe. One of our witnesses even talked about being a good guy with a gun, being somebody able to provide for self-defense and the righteous defense of others. And I heard in that hearing a term I had never heard before from the Democrat witness: a crime gun. So I guess there are guns and crime guns. And I was left wondering, what makes a gun a crime gun? And I think it's that it's in the hands of a criminal committing a crime. The very criminals that Democrats seem quite willing to turn out on our streets time and time again. We heard the Democrat witness at a joint hearing between the Judiciary Committee and the Oversight Committee, invited by Democrats, say that these braces make guns more powerful and more lethal, and it was the laugh line of the hearing and summarily rejected by experts. But what this rule proves is that the Biden administration and Democrats are intent to weaponize the ATF in order to erode the Second Amendment and take away constitutional rights from otherwise law-abiding Americans, and they intend to do so without the approval of Congress.
Gentleman yield.
And what undermines the passion for my Democrat colleagues is that when they had the ability to do this in law, when they had unified control of the government, they didn't do it. And so when they really come for your rights, and when they really want to erode the Constitution, they don't do it with folks who can be sent home by the voters. They do it with unelected bureaucrats with green eye shades somewhere in some windowless cubicle in the bowels of the ATF.
The gentleman yield.
The ATF has abused its rulemaking authority in attempting to regulate stabilizing braces, and these braces were invented by Alex Brosco, a U.S. Marine Corps and Army veteran, to help disabled combat veterans better control and safely fire guns at shooting ranges. I represent many of these disabled veterans in my district, and I can tell you the extent to which the opportunity to engage in competitive shooting is a mental health enhancer. It's what keeps people engaged. I worry about the number of veteran suicides we may see increase at an already totally unacceptable level if we were to take this away and take this mental health tool away. The ATF's decision also contradicted its own prior 2012 determination made during the Obama administration, not known as particularly kind to gun owners. And that was a decision that was relied upon by gun owners for a decade, that they would not be subject to the National Firearms Control Act with the purchase of this stabilizing brace. Now the ATF's rule will require the owners of roughly 40 million stabilizing braces in circulation to obtain some special registration, surrender or destroy their brace by the compliant state, or face severe criminal penalties. And what I can tell you is these will be enforced. I am increasingly aware of circumstances in my district where almost anyone involved in the firearms industry, they are seeing the ATF show up with crazy demands and enforcement that goes beyond what we would normally consider from a government agency simply trying to seek compliance. My friends, this is part of a comprehensive attack on the Second Amendment, and this legislation would vindicate at least those who require this stabilizing brace. And while we all share the desire to reduce the frequency of gun violence, there is no evidence to suggest that these stabilizing braces contribute to it. And it is rather rich that we're now hearing from our Democrat colleagues about the stabilizing braces, because when there was legislation that they proposed that they couldn't get passed in the Senate, they told us that stabilizing braces could convert weapons into bump stocks. And what a revealing moment that was. I yield my final moments to my colleague from Kentucky.
Well, the gentleman from Florida is correct. These are not shoulder stocks, as the other side says. There's two ways we know they're not shoulder stocks. One, the legal definition of a shoulder stock says designed and intended to be fired from the shoulder. These were not designed or intended to be fired from the shoulder. They were intended to be fired from the wrist. The other way we know they're not shoulder stocks is for a decade the ATF said they were not. And I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just be brief. I remember in Judiciary in the 117th Congress, we had a similar discussion and a similar debate. And quite honestly, a lot of the members had no idea kind of what we were talking about or how the nomenclature of any type of firearm can be changed, or the uniqueness in and around it, or that the caliber and certainly the ability to utilize any type of firearm it is sometimes in just the eye of the beholder. And, you know, there are many people that I know, including members of my family, that utilize many different types of rifles for, you know, the 9-day gun season for deer hunting in Wisconsin, in which over 400,000 individuals go safely into the woods for 9 days and hopefully get a deer. So it's once again, I just wanted to remind the committee that you can focus on the tragedies that have happened across this nation, but also you have to remember those that continually, on a regular basis, are gun owners and should be protected by the Second Amendment. The focus of this discussion that we have continued to have, Congress after Congress, is misplaced. And I think that just had to be brought forth again this evening.
Well, gentlemen,
I would yield back.
Gentlemen, yield.
Yielded. Chair.
I think the gentleman for yielding. I think we're making it too complicated. This is, as Mr. Massey said, a 4-ounce plastic accessory created for disabled veterans by a veteran, now used by approximately 40 million Americans. And 10 years ago and 5 months, November 26, 2012, the ATF said, just fine, no problem. Now here they are 10 years later, changing their mind, and they just did it. We didn't do it, as Mr. Massey pointed out. Democrats had the Congress last 2 years. They passed a bunch of gun legislation through this committee. They could have done this. They didn't do it. The ATF did it. No bill that came through committee, no bill that went to the House floor, no bill that went to the Senate, no bill signed by the president. They just did it. And now 40 million Americans, if you don't destroy the brace, destroy the gun, get a longer barrel, or register your firearm, you're a felon. And as Mr. Massey pointed out, a bunch of Americans don't even know it. They don't even know. They're in some states where they can't. That's the problem. So you guys introduce the legislation if you want, but we should get rid of this rule that is going to cause so much harm to so many Americans, many of them, the type of Americans that Mr. Fitzgerald just described, who like to hunt, particularly deer hunt in Wisconsin. That's how simple this is. Do it the right way. Pass it through Congress if you want to do it. Don't chip away at the Second Amendment by having bureaucrats do it. The ATF do it when 10 years ago in 5 months they said it was just fine. Yield back to the gentleman from Wisconsin.
As a father of 3 young children, I'm deeply wounded by the horrific tragedy that we saw in Nashville. We saw the lives of 6 people taken, 3 young children. The shooting was reported to police at 10:13 a.m., and the suspect was shot by 2 Nashville police officers at 10:27 a.m. This quick response time saved countless lives is a testament to law enforcement, and we thank them every single day. As a congressman, I want to do everything in my power to protect children all around this country from experiencing something like that again. Unlike my colleagues on the left, I'm different, and I think an actual solution to protect our children is not what's being proposed by the left, nor is it political. It is a clear attempt to erode the Second Amendment rights for law-abiding citizens and AR-15 owners like myself. Every time I walk around this Capitol, I feel extremely safe. I've deployed multiple times. I've been on multiple bases. I think to myself, oh my goodness, hot damn. I don't have to really worry about anything because I'm surrounded by people with guns that want to keep me safe. We have barricades, multiple checkpoints, metal detectors. We are staffed by 2 or 4 police officers at all times. All day, there was a gentleman standing at this door in case somebody entered this room with a gun. The U.S. Capitol Police is comprised of more than 2,000 officers and over 350 civilian employees who provide operational and administrative support that has an annual budget of approximately $460 million. And for some of my colleagues, that's still not enough, because they have their own private security on top of that, surrounded by people that carry guns. And I can assure you that the people here on the Hill are well protected. What about our school children? This is not a round. This is a pen. Now, one of my staffers tried to bring this pen to my office, and he was stopped by a metal detector, and it went through the x-ray machine, and he was almost tackled by our police services right here at the Capitol, doing their jobs, of course. And we proved that, of course, it was a pen. If a pen that looks like this can't get to my office, then how does a homicidal maniac that has weapons walk into a school and arbitrarily murder innocent children? Because we wear this pen, that does not make us more important than our children. There's a private school in Houston, Texas, and I was there a few months ago, and I was giving a young man his appointment to West Point. I drove on the campus, and I was met by 2 armed guards. There were parking places that were just for visitors, and they had even more armed guards beyond that. I felt very secure as I drove onto this school. The headmaster or head of school, she met me in the front, and I said, "My God, ma'am, I feel very secure in this place. What's the secret here?" She said, "Wesley, actually, given my religious beliefs, I hate guns. I don't do guns. But it's my responsibility to keep these young people safe. It's not about how I feel about guns or what I think about them or what I do or don't know. I must keep these children safe because they are the most precious things that we have on this earth. I keep hearing this word AR-15s and a weapon of war. I find that funny because, well, I've been to war. And you should Google the AX-64 Delta Apache helicopter. That is what I would call a true weapon of war. But I feel people calling these things a weapon of war, but they've never been to war and they don't know what war is. And they're using the AR-15 as a scapegoat for everything. I say that because according to the ATF, 6% of homicides are at the hands of AR-15s, 60% at the hands of handguns. So if you really want to have an intellectually honest conversation about homicide reduction, you would go after pistols. But you don't do that because you want to go after the AR-15 first to then eventually get to the pistol to disarm Americans to infringe on our Second Amendment rights. I want you to know something. It ain't the gun. It's the homicidal maniac. The deadliest days in this country, 9/11, not a single shot was fired. Timothy McVeigh, fertilizer, Oklahoma City. The Boston Marathon, pressure cookers, not a single shot was fired. I know what war looks like, but what I do want to say is we have got to agree we can all protect our children, and we should not be protected more than them. And I yield back.
Lady yields back. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Nels, is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized.
Folks, it appears to me that the gentleman who leads the ATF, the director of the ATF, is unqualified to do so, and let me explain why. Yesterday, the ATF director, Steve Dettelbeck, testified in front of our colleagues on the House Appropriations Committee. His poster board, there he is, that fella right there. When asked if he could define what an assault weapon was, I mean, it's been said several times on the other side, what an assault weapon was, Mr. Dettelbeck, the sole man responsible for leading an agency charged with enforcing the laws and regulations related to firearms in the United States of America, said, I quote, "Unlike you, I am not a firearms expert to the same extent as you may be," end quote. Let me say that again. The man responsible, this fella right here, the man responsible for gun regulations of the United States of America said he is not the #1 firearm expert in the room that day. Now tell me how that makes sense, folks. It makes no sense at all. So this non-expert, I will say he's a non-expert, this non-expert, Mr. Dettelbeck, introduced a final ATF rule in January which would reclassify pistols as short-barreled rifles if they have a stabilizing brace attached. This rule would also require American gun owners, many of who are veterans, to either register pistols with stabilization braces with the ATF, turn over those firearms, or face 10 years in jail. Yes, 10 years in jail. We don't give murderers that in the justice system today, and up to a $10,000 fine. It is quite evident to me and everybody that watched that hearing yesterday that this man is not a firearms expert. He does not understand our disabled veterans and other Americans rely on these braces to use their firearms. He does not understand that this is an abuse of rulemaking authority. He does not understand our Constitution provides God-fearing Americans, many of us in this room, the right to bear arms. And I tell you, I'm a proud co-sponsor of this resolution today to repeal Mr. Dettelbeck's unconstitutional pistol brace rule, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to correct the record as to the leading cause of death of children. That is a statistic that has been thrown around rather aggressively this evening. It is not true, and in fact, that is not what the CDC data shows. What people are relying upon is an inaccurate study that does not relate specifically to minors, but actually included 18 and 19-year-old adults. The three top causes of death for children are certain conditions originating in the perinatal period, congenital malformations, deformations, and chromosomal abnormalities, and symptoms, signs, and abnormal clinical and laboratory findings. That's actually the CDC data itself. If you actually look at children 12 years and younger, The other additional causes of death, leading causes of death, are suffocation, motor vehicle accidents, and drowning, all of which are more than the deaths caused by firearms. So I just want to make sure that the record is accurate so that we don't deal with those bad statistics. I also want to say that it is very clear to me that my colleagues on the other side apparently believe that guns and pistol braces and other inanimate objects have the ability to stand up, walk out of the house, drive down the street, and act on their own volition. But that is not the case. Guns do not act without the person actually shooting them. And what we need to be doing is focusing on the criminals. So what I would say is, one of my colleagues just said this hearing is not about a piece of plastic, but that's exactly what it is about, because that is the issue before us this evening, and it demonstrates the problem with the FDA, or the ATF regulation in the first place. The ATF has issued a regulation attempting to outlaw pistol braces. The ATF does not have the legal authority to do that. If my colleagues on the other side want to have a debate about banning guns and the Second Amendment, I suggest that we have the hearing specific to that issue, because what we're dealing with tonight is a regulation and the Congressional Review Act. So the fact that the Democrats have immediately gone to gun control and banning weapons and banning and attempting to take away our Second Amendment rights, I think very clearly shows exactly the problem with the ATF rule and why it should be repealed, because of the fact that the ATF does not have the legal authority to do that. It's the legislative body that has the legal authority to act. And then at that point, we also have to address the Second Amendment. But I just want to read something very quickly here that I was just looking up as I was listening to this, to the testimony and to the statements made today. This is something that we just had an anniversary yesterday, and I'm just going to read this very quickly because I think it epitomizes where the other side is coming from on this discussion. The sun never set on the British Empire. It was the largest empire in world history. Out of nearly 200 countries in the world, only 22 were never controlled, invaded, or attacked by Britain. In April of 1775, the British Royal Military Governor of Massachusetts, General Thomas Gage, sent 800 British Army regulars under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith on a preemptive raid to seize guns from American patriots at Lexington and Concord. George Mason of Virginia stated, "To disarm the people is the best and most effectual way to enslave them." That is why we have the Second Amendment. It protects our ability to keep and bear arms. The ATF does not have the legal authority to adopt the rule that they have. To the extent that there is to be any discussion about the banning of guns, it should be taking place in the legislative body with the understanding and the analysis of the Second Amendment that is appropriate. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman. It's been a long night, and I'm going to try to be pretty quick here because I don't think we're going to convince them, and I don't think they're going to convince us. But there's a few things I want to say. So much of this really is political. I guess folks don't want to admit it, but I mean, you had control. You had the and you've heard this before. You had the executive branch. You had the House. You had the Senate. And now it all gets blamed on us. You could have made change then. You had the majority in every single house, but it didn't happen. And it's always a political answer. You know why? Because it sounds so good. Let's take guns away from legal gun owners that 99.9% don't do anything wrong ever, but that will fix the problem. It won't fix the problem. So we'll make this brace illegal. Now, are you going to tell me because we make this brace illegal that criminals and those with mental health problems are going to, decide, gee, I can't use the brace anymore, so I'm just going to stop? They're breaking the law. They're murderers, or they have serious mental health issues. they're not going to change because you change a law. They are already used to breaking the law, and the people will still do it, will continue to do it. We do need to do things that was mentioned here a couple times, like making our schools safer. And I'd love people to join me on my bill, my Safe Schools bill, which would make sure that people just couldn't walk straight into a school, that before they walked in, they had to be buzzed in not once, but twice, and that you had a safety officer there. And the safety officer could make sure that things were safe in the inside. And I guarantee you that crime would go down in schools, that mass murders would go down in schools. And in New York City, some folks, I guess, made fun of the victims. Even tonight, you did. Well, you know, the interesting thing about those victims, one got the living daylights beaten out of them, and the other two, it was victims of knives. So, you know, we, I guess, could take knives away, but, you know, we're always going to blame guns because guns are scary. People talk about guns, they don't even understand what really is an assault weapon, what's an automatic, what's a semi-automatic. Most of the people making the rules, most of the people doing the legislation don't even understand what they're doing legislation about. Well, I shoot at the range. I shoot at the range once to twice a week. I'm a gun owner. I believe in the Second Amendment, and those that say that older people, disabled people, and veterans aren't there using those devices aren't telling the truth. I don't know how else to say it. It's not accurate, because if you go there, you'll see them. You know, individuals who have enjoyed this for years, they're older, their hands are shaky, people that have neurologic problems, people that have other health issues, and the older veterans. Maybe if we had better prosecutors that didn't keep having a revolving door and turn bad people out, and areas where we keep making the rules tighter and harder for guns, Chicago, New York, California, the crimes are going up and the shootings are going up because we're letting bad people out of jail. But that doesn't matter, I guess. The truth is, those folks that commit those kind of aggressive crimes, those criminals should stay in jail for a good long time, maybe forever. And finally, like I said, I'd welcome anybody to join my Safe School Act if they really believe that they want to make a difference, because that will make a difference. Mr. Hunt was so right. His speech was so good. He was on the money. Here's somebody who's a veteran. Here's somebody who was in the military. Here's somebody who's in war. Here's somebody who understands guns, like the people at the range where I shoot. And they wouldn't even understand what half of you were talking about because it doesn't work. So make them illegal. Make these braces illegal, and let's see, because you're going to promise people it's going to make things better, how much better it gets.
Mr. Andrew, will you yield for just one clarification?
No, I got to finish this. And you know what else it doesn't show? It doesn't show that the statistics show, look them up, when they were illegal in New Jersey in certain areas, it was no better crime-wise. It didn't make a difference. A bad person or a person with severe mental health problems are still going to commit crimes. And there's much better ways to go about that. We need more mental health work being done in our country. And I don't know who asked me, but I will yield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is late here, and, you know, Mr. Swalwell's been gone most of the day, but I just want to note real quickly that he just accused Republicans of, quote, wanting to arm killers. You know, and I just want to say, when you say outrageous things like that, you obviously diminish your own arguments and your own credibility. I represent Louisiana. We're nicknamed the sportsman's paradise. I mean, in Louisiana, we revere our Second Amendment rights. We hunt with our children. We teach them responsible gun safety and ownership. We're serious about preserving our fundamental freedoms and the great traditions of this country. And when you try to diminish people who stand for that, it undermines your own argument. Look, I'm telling you what my constituents in Louisiana see. When they think of the ATF, many people, when they see the ATF, they see that it's one of the alphabet agencies in Washington that was designed to serve the people and is being used against them. You have their authority that's being abused here. You have, as was pointed out earlier by Mr. Nels, you have the director of the ATF in front of Congress under oath who can't even describe his own job. He can't even adequately define the very firearms that he's supposed to be regulating, and it undermines the people's faith in our institutions and in this agencies that's just run amok. I want to yield my time to Mr. Massey because he has a lot to add to this.
Yeah, I think Mr. Johnson, depending on the state that you live in and your response to this ATF rule, it either will ban, register, or destroy stabilizing braces for pistols that resemble collapsible stocks. Do you know, and I think everybody on the other side of the aisle is about to get really surprised at what I'm about to say. Do you know what this doesn't ban, register, or destroy? Collapsible stocks. It only bans, registers, or destroys stabilizing braces for pistols that resemble collapsible stocks. There are even more collapsible stocks than there are stabilizing braces. Now, why doesn't this rule ban, destroy, or otherwise register collapsible stocks? Because they can't do it. There's no construction, even in their tortured legal logic that they've made, to ban, register, or destroy stabilizing braces that resemble collapsible stocks. They're not able to ban collapsible stocks. I've got these things laying around at home. It's a piece of plastic. There's honestly really no reason to regulate this piece of plastic. You could recreate one easily. So what are you going to do? Everything that the Democrats don't like is a loophole. I've tried to figure out what their definition of a loophole is. Everything they don't like is a loophole. So then I'm afraid they're going to be back and say there's the collapsible stock loophole. We, through regulation, not through lawmaking, but through regulatory fiat, somebody was able, some unelected bureaucrat was able to ban, register, or destroy something that resembled a collapsible stock, but they were not able to ban a collapsible stock. So you're not making anything less lethal. Now, those collapsible stocks, if you're a law-abiding citizen, have to be used on a rifle. Okay, what's the difference between a rifle, an AR-15 rifle, and an AR-15 pistol? Does anybody on the other side of the aisle know? I'll wait.
They don't even know what a collapsible stock is.
Well, because I think it's important. I'm always torn on whether I should help them understand what they're trying to ban. The difference between an AR-15 pistol or an AR-15 rifle.
No takers.
No takers. It's about 6 or 8 inches in length. A barrel on a rifle has to be 16 inches, and a pistol is anything less than that doesn't have something designed or intended to be fired from the shoulder. So you're not getting rid of these things. What you're doing, there's a saying, if guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns. That's supposed to be a prediction, but I think the Biden administration used that as an instruction. And they said, well, we can create a bunch of outlaws by banning a piece of plastic. And that's what they've done, and that's what's going to happen on June 1st. Millions of felons who don't realize they're felons. And these are serious felonies. This is not a civil infraction, are going to be created. And just, if I have more time later, I'll get to the fact or the non-fact that Mr. Cicilline pointed out, the Kaiser Foundation. And I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
I thank the chairman. I thank my friend from Kentucky. Associate myself with his remarks. There's a lot of different ways to go with all of this. I mean, look, I think the truth is, I think the Supreme Court or the courts, before it gets to the Supreme Court, will kill this. And I think they'll be right to do so. I think this is an extreme overreach by the executive branch in total violation of the Constitution, the Administrative Procedures Act. And it should alarm all of us, regardless of which side of the aisle you're on, and regardless of what you want to achieve. I want to see a wall get built along the southern border. I supported President Trump doing so, supported President Trump using emergency authority to do it, but was happy to introduce legislation to limit that authority, to limit executive power. We should all want to do that. But instead, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are completely ignoring this blatant abuse by the administrative bureaucrats in the executive branch because they like the outcome. But we should all be troubled by it. And we shouldn't just defer to the courts to defend our constitutional rights and separation of powers. We have an obligation to do it. So with all due respect to my colleagues complaining about being here at 12:40 in the morning, not doing anything important, I think what we're doing here is of the utmost importance, and not because of the inherent substance of the question, but because we have an obligation to defend the constitutional separation of powers. And we are doing that here rather than punting to the courts. It is critically important that we do this. There are a bunch of different things I could go through. But the one thing that's clear here is my colleagues here, this is not about wanting to just get rid of this piece of plastic or have registration. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to ban these weapons. We know this, they've said so repeatedly. Probably most of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle here, I don't know. Certainly the president, certainly most, they want to ban them. They want to get rid of them. They'd like to get rid of many more weapons, semi-automatic pistols, otherwise. Almost all of which are in commonplace use. And I could focus on all of that. We don't have enough time. I think the most important thing to focus on right now is not the guns, but it's what's happening. Why is this happening? What is happening to our young men? That they will walk into a school and do this. What kind of a society are we operating in? And if you look at the data right now in terms of what's happening, in a period just right before COVID, data had 81,000 emergency department visits by young people, as young as 5 coded for suicidal ideation. Quarter of those turned into hospital stays. Suicide rates skyrocketed during COVID. Suicidal thoughts skyrocketed during COVID. The fact is, the people who are perpetrating these things, young, male, angry, notably disturbed, refusal to attend school, anger toward girls and women, antisocial, no sense to belonging to family, to school, to a community, and threats online. You go down the whole list of what's going on. We are a unchurched, detached, immoral society that is focusing too damn much on social media and what you can get on all of these devices. If we don't address that, none of this matters. We are leaving a generation of Americans completely removed from what it actually takes to engage in society and function. We are killing our children. We are killing them every second we allow them to sit on these devices all day, stewing on 24-hour news cycles of the most negative influence you can possibly have on a regular basis. I had an event that I was at with my son Easter weekend where devices were not allowed. We spent all day with a whole lot of people that we didn't know and talked to them from other states, other walks of life. And it was wonderful. And if we don't address this, and if we don't address our families, and if we don't address our societal problem, and the lack of families, and the lack of fathers, and the lack of community, we are going to lose it if we haven't already lost it. The problem isn't the guns. The problem isn't it's the fact that we're letting our society rot, a cultural rot. That is our calling as leaders of this society. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a familiar pattern. After every criminal atrocity, the Democrats call for a new round of gun control laws. And now we have more than 50 years of experience with those gun control laws. You'd think if they actually worked, things would be getting better and not worse. We found these laws are very effective at disarming law-abiding citizens. We've also found they're extremely ineffective at disarming criminals and terrorists and madmen. We know how to reduce gun violence, prosecute gun criminals,
send violent criminals to jail until they're old and gray, execute the murderers, harden our schools, confine the dangerously mentally ill so that we can treat them, stop letting terrorists into our country across our southern borders. Yet these are the time-proven measures the Democrats refuse to restore or even to consider. Woke Democratic district attorneys often refuse to prosecute gun criminals, or they quickly drop gun charges to reduce their sentences. The Democrats have all but abolished the death penalty. They've released dangerous criminals from our prisons, released dangerous illegal aliens into our communities. They've flooded our streets with the dangerously mentally ill. They've turned a blind eye to as terrorists come across the border that they've left wide open. And then they wonder why we're plagued with violent criminals. I am as sick of these crimes as the Democrats say they are. So here's a modest suggestion. Let's get the criminals and madmen off the streets, fire the woke district attorneys, and prosecute violent criminals to the maximum extent of the law. And if that's not enough, then strengthen those laws. And while we're at it, let us also reclaim the constitutional guardrails that reserve to the elected representatives of the people the sole prerogative to make these laws. The Democrats love to talk about threats to democracy. Well, one of the most fundamental threats to democracy is removing the power to legislate from democratically elected representatives of the people who are accountable to our democracy and giving it instead to unelected bureaucrats who are immune and often contemptuous of that democracy. That's what this measure does. It's to restore those guardrails. And with that, if Mr. Massey has anything to add,
Yes,
I'll yield to him.
absolutely. Just to reiterate the point that Ms. Hageman from Wyoming made, the data that the gentleman submitted for the record is flawed. They exclude children under the ages of 1, and they include adults aged 18 and 19. Specifically, the Kaiser study that Mr. Cicilline submitted for the record has this flaw. And when you quit excluding children under the age of 1, and when you quit including ages 18 and 19, by the way, those are mostly gang deaths involved in gang violence, it's simply not true that it's the leading cause of death for children.
Would the gentleman
by anybody's
yield for a question?
definition of children. Yes, sir. I'll yield.
Does that mean that between the ages of 2 and 19, gun violence is the leading cause of death under your statistics?
The Kaiser study says that, yes. And
you're okay with that?
No death is good. No, it doesn't, because you're not between 2 and 18, 2 to 9, or 1 to 19. But reclaiming Mr. McClintock's time, let me be clear about what's happened, because I don't want you all to walk away thinking this will save lives. I really don't. This is an aesthetic, ergonomic, cosmetic accessory to a firearm. It doesn't change the muzzle velocity. It does, in spite of Mr. Cicilline's claims in a prior hearing, it doesn't change the rate of fire. It doesn't change the capacity of the weapon. You could say, the one thing you could say is it improves the concealability by 8 inches, but in most of these shootings, all of the shootings that I've seen on camera, the person is not concealing anything. They are coming in guns blazing, concealability. They are living in a fantasy, a lot of times fueled by prescription drugs that have separated them from reality. If there needs to be any kind of data that we need in front of this committee, any kind of report or any kind of registry, it should be, we should have access to know which prescription drugs these killers were on at the time they committed the crime. And that should be collected by FDA. They're supposed to say that these are safe and effective and report the side effects. And if we could do one thing at this level, that would be it. And I yield back to the gentleman from California.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request. I'm going to try one more time. I'd ask unanimous consent to put into record a PolitiFact from the Austin American Statement. Are firearms a leading cause of death of children? Yes, into the record.
No objection.
I have asked unanimous consent requests.
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
To submit for the record an article from 2.5 weeks ago in Snopes, of all places, which fact checks Mr. Cicilline's information and shows that Ms. Hagelman is correct, not Mr. Cicilline.
Fact checking the fact checkers. All right, Ms. Consent.
I'd like to submit for the record Pew Research data dated February 3rd, 2022, which shows, and I think this gets to Mr. Ivey's point, which I respect greatly, it shows that the majority of these firearm deaths that we're quoting in these adolescent years are suicides. That's the majority of them. And that is something that we need to focus on.
Without objection.
And
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for unanimous consent.
I have a unanimous consent request to submit for the record a paper by Crime Prevention Research Center comparing the global rate of mass public shootings to the U.S. rates and comparing their changes over time. The U.S. is well below the world average in terms of number of mass public shootings per capita. And not as a consolation, but just as a rebuttal to what's been said here tonight, which was not true.
Gentlelady yields back, a reporting quorum being present. The question is on favorably reporting the resolution. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the resolution is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. Members will have 2 days to submit views. Roll call being requested. We'll go to a roll call. The clerk will call that roll.
Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Issa? Mr. Issa votes yes. Mr. Buck? Mr. Gates? Mr. Johnson of Louisiana? Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes aye. Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes aye. Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes aye. Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Tiffany votes aye. Mr. Massey?
Hang on. Committee will be in order. We got to finish the roll call.
Mr. Massey?
Thomas. Thomas.
Mr. Massey votes yes. Mr. Roy? Mr. Roy votes yes. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes yes. Ms. Sparts? Ms. Sparts votes yes. Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Fitzgerald votes aye. Mr. Bentz? Mr. Bentz votes yes. Mr. Klein? Mr. Klein votes aye. Mr. Gooden? Mr. Van Drew? Mr. Van Drew votes yes. Mr. Nels? Mr. Nels votes yes. Mr. Moore? Mr. Moore votes yes. Mr. Kiley? Mr. Kiley votes yes. Ms. Hageman? Ms. Hageman votes yes. Mr. Moran? Mr. Moran votes yes. Ms. Lee? Ms. Lee votes yes. Mr. Hunt? Mr. Hunt votes yes.
It'll be in
Mr. Fry?
order.
Mr. Fry votes aye. Mr. Nadler?
No.
Mr. Nadler votes no. Ms. Lofgren? No. Ms. Lofgren votes no. Ms. Jackson Lee? Ms. Jackson Lee? No. Ms. Jackson Lee votes no. Mr. Cohen? Mr. Johnson of Georgia? Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes no. Mr. Schiff? Mr. Schiff votes no. Mr. Cicilline?
No.
Mr. Cicilline votes no. Mr. Swalwell?
Nope.
Mr. Swalwell votes no. Mr. Liu? Mr. Liu votes no. Ms. Jayapal? Ms. Jayapal votes no. Mr. Correa? Mr. Correa? Mr. Correa votes no. Ms. Scanlon?
Scanlon.
Ms. Scanlon votes no. Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse votes no. Ms. McBath? Ms. McBath votes no. Ms. Dean? Ms. Escobar? Ms. Escobar votes no. Ms. Ross? Ms. Bush? Mr. Ivey? Mr. Ivey votes no.
Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Gates, you're not recorded. Mr. Gates votes aye.
Have all members voted? Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 23 ayes and 15 noes.
The ayes have it, and the resolution is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. Members will have 2 days to submit views. This concludes the committee's business for the day. The meeting is adjourned.